Alistair, what a pleasure to meet you, to see you again.
Pleasure
Um,
to meet you again, and thank you so much for having me on.
of course, I was thinking this morning, actually, how long do we go, actually? Like, since when do I know you?
Well, like 2 years ago, I think maybe we met.
Oh, yeah, you were yeah, right, in Amsterdam, right.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
true. That's true. And I think the first time saw you, before I met you, was when I came across these instructional videos you made for the iwi. I think it was like 10 years ago almost, or 12 years ago.
Yeah, 10
So
years,
that's
I think, yeah.
when the 4000S came out. And yeah, I remember that. And I also, of course, saw the demos you made, and I saw the promotional material you made for the iwi and later for the Aerophone with Roland, which we're going to be discussing about shortly. Um, so the first thing, maybe just to kick off the conversation, and this is maybe the most obvious question to ask at the beginning, is tell me a bit about yourself and how it all started with you and wind synthesis.
So I'm kind of born into a musical family. Both of my parents played the accordion professionally. And we even had like family band and things. So we did a lot of gigs together early on. And I started off with piano, did a little bit of clarinet, and then eventually found the saxophone. And this was definitely my voice. And went to the Royal College of Music in London to study saxophone. This was like 1984. So this is classical saxophone. And I did 3 years there. And it was during that time there was a little kind of second-hand keyboard shop just down the road from me where I was staying in Notting Hill. And I remember going in there and trying out some of the new synths. And this was just as some of the big synths were kind of really coming to the fore. So that was the first time like I saw and tried a DX7, some of the early Roland synths. And of course, being in London, there were some other places as well. So I managed to kind of go in and try some of the synthesizers there. And then around that time, the Yamaha WX7 was released. And this was like, wow, I play a saxophone, and this is kind of like a saxophone, and I'm also getting into synthesizers, and this is the marriage of the two. And so that was like the real first spark for me. And I believe I was one of the first, if not the first person to have a WX7 in the UK. A good friend of mine called Richard Ingham actually did some promotion with Yamaha for that, and I went to one of his kind of classes where he was teaching people how to kind of get into this WX7. And I remember knowing about the Akai at that time, but as far as I'm aware, we couldn't get hold of it here. Of course, this was pre-eBay and internet days, so you couldn't just kind of look online and find these things. And as far as I know, we could not get hold of the Akais over here. So I stayed on the WX7 with the TX81Z rack mount thing. Which, in those days, it seems amazing now, but the way we loaded voices onto those things was from a cassette tape. Most kids nowadays don't even know what a cassette tape is, do they? But and that was the way of putting these sounds onto there. And of course, I saw Sal Galina play a demo in London. Wow, he did this trade-off thing with this guitarist, and it was just absolutely phenomenal. My wife at that sorry, go on.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just funny that you mentioned it because I think about a week ago I came out, I found Patchman's music website again, and I listened to those demos that he made for the WX7, and I was like, what? I mean, I was amazed. It blew me away. But the way that he plays it and the way that just the sounds that he comes up with are just mind blowing.
Yeah.
And I think these demos that he made are just out of this world, man.
It was a monster. And to say this, the TX81Z was not the most advanced kind of module.
Yeah.
Certainly not compared to
Yeah.
what we have now, but wow, what he could get out of that thing was just incredible.
Mm.
And then my wife was also living in a house full of musicians in London. She was also at music college. So before we were married, and a couple of really great musicians there, jazz players, said to me, okay, well, if you're into wind synthesizers, you must have heard this. And they showed me this album of Mike Brecker, Steps Ahead. I was like, no, I don't know this. And, well, as you know, In a Sentimental Mood. I mean,
Right.
just like, woo. For me, this was just incredible. And
Could you explain why that particular track? Because
well, yeah.
let me just say, this album, I mean, there's like 4 or 5 tracks where he uses the Iwi on it, right?
Yeah.
But everybody talks about In a Sentimental Mood. So I'm just curious to know, from your perspective, why this track became kind of like the holy grail of Iwi?
Well, I think that's a brilliant question. For me, I know my answer straight away. For me, this was, of course, an incredible saxophone player, but he was making an electronic instrument expressive, absolutely 100% expressive. He was breathing life into the instrument.
Right.
The nuances, the subtleties, of course, the fantastic phrasing and runs he was playing, but it was just the emotion and the feel. And this was coming from an electronic instrument. And for me, that was right. This is something that, because I love the saxophone, of course, I find it's one of the most expressive instruments that we have. But to have that in an electronic instrument, this was something I really wanted to try to get into. And that was where my love of it came. Yeah.
Wow. So later on, you continue and purchase one of those instruments, I guess?
Yeah. Eventually, I thought, let me try and make the jump over to the Akai. So I had the 4000 early on, and I had it for about a month or so, and I really struggled because the touch sensitive keys and everything, I found it really, really challenging. And I thought, oh my goodness, what have I done? I've traded in by that time it was WX5, I think I'd had. And I thought, I've made a big mistake. And one of the things that actually saved me was, I don't know if you've come across it, there's a YouTube of Jeff Kashua playing a loop on his Boss RC300 or something, I think it was called. And I remember thinking, that's cool. Let me get one of these things. So I bought the looper, and I spent hours and hours trying to kind of copy that loop. And in the meantime, of course, I was learning how to get around the Akai. So in fact, for me, that one experiment really pulled me over the line in terms of getting used to the Akai and enjoying the loop pedal as well. But that was actually the thing that saved me and got me onto the Akai, because without that, I'm not sure I would have maybe persevered. It's pretty hard, isn't it, when you're not used to that touch-sensitive thing
Of course.
to stick with it.
Definitely. I guess that's the first challenge you encounter when you pick up an Iwi that's, oh, wait a second. This is a completely different feel, let alone the reaction time of such an instrument is much faster.
Yes.
Which draws some problems in the beginning.
Yes.
Yes, I totally understand what you mean.
And then, the 5000 came along, which I guess I jumped at fairly quickly, just that it was like, wow, we haven't had a new one for years. Let's, go. I ended up not using that quite so much. I like the fact that you can plug it in by the USB connection.
Right.
So that was really good. But I think, like a lot of people, they ended up sort of sticking with the 4000 longer. Right. And that's when I started doing the videos, which, 10 years ago. And I really didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was getting into. I didn't know if they'd be watched by anybody. But, you know, that then led on to a whole new chapter of playing WindSynths and getting in touch with some fantastic people like you. You know, this was a whole new chapter for me. So
Beautiful. Beautiful. And then a couple of years back, Roland comes up with a new instrument. And I assume they asked you to work with them together to promote this instrument, to create demos. And since then, you are focusing on the Aerophone. How did that go through?
Okay, so it actually happened as much as like 4 years ago, I think, just before they did the first Aerophone. And I got to find out that there were two guys in Roland who actually saw those iwi videos pretty much simultaneously. They were out searching, right, who can we get some help from? And they went online and found those iwi videos that I'd done. So we had a couple of meetings and things. And, you know, at first it wasn't a case of, you know, will you come on board? Will you help us? It was just a case of, we've got this prototype. Do you think you'd be able to play on it and see what you think? Give us some feedback. And it was exciting because, you know, this was brand new. We hadn't had a new Akai for many years. And I had some Roland gear already, so it was nice to be, you know, kind of invited to do that. And so that was the beginning of all of that. One thing that's really kind of kept me, shall we say, enthusiastic about the Roland guys is there's some really great people that in that company, and the thing that's amazes me about them is that you see them as, you know, their manager of this or their head of that or their, you know, and, you know, pretty much all of them are actually pretty good musicians. And you don't realize until you're on some gig or something and they just sit down and start playing some phenomenal kind of jazz piano or something. You say, wow, I didn't even know you could play. So it feels like, to me anyway, with my contact, I feel like I'm part of a bunch of musicians rather than a bunch of kind of technical and marketing people. I'm sure they have that side, but that's no interest to me. I love the fact that those guys are musicians. They're very respectful of me, and I'm very respectful of them. And it's been nice, you know.
Wow. And then what is it? Like a couple of weeks back comes the new Aerophone, the AE30, which is supposed to be sort of an answer that we've been waiting for the professional market, at least. How was that?
So, yeah. Okay. So this first came to my knowledge almost like back at the very beginning of the pandemic. And again, they said, you know, would you give this a test out and see what you think? Which I did. And they also then kind of asked me, you know, would I have a go at programming some sounds, which had not had that much experience of. This was a little bit scary for me because they, you know, the other guy that's done some programming is Matt Trong. I mean, you know, his reputation, just
of course.
Incredible. I think pretty much everybody's played his sounds. Anyway, so, you know, that was a fun thing for me to do, a learning curve over the summer while I've got time in the studio here. So I did a lot of programming on one of the Roland Phantom keyboards, which has basically the same internal sound chip. And some toing and froing between myself and the Japanese developers. And then, yeah, they released it just a couple of weeks ago. And just, I guess for me, it's certainly not something, from my point anyway, that is something that I expect to kind of, you know, be the one and all WindSynth. Because the great thing about where we are now is that we've got choice. and people will suit different instruments. And the between the Akai and the Roland, of course, there's a huge fundamental difference in that the Roland has moving keys, and the Akai is touch sensitive, and there are going to be many people that prefer one over the other. But it's a shame, I think, if it becomes a bit of a kind of which one is best and which is a battle.
Right.
It's nice we have choice. We don't all drive the same car because we have different preferences. So let's go with what we like.
Yeah, and you're enjoying the new Aerophone?
I am, because this is really now taking me kind of back full circle to the early Michael Brecker recording, because now when I play this instrument, there is for me a heart in the sound, a sound that I can control, the way I want to control it. I feel that there's some great sounds in there, and yeah, I enjoy the extra gizmos and all the possibilities, but fundamentally it's about the sound. And if there's a sound that you feel, okay, I can just play this and enjoy it, I don't care if it does this, that, and the other, I just want to enjoy the sound and play musically. That's a priority for me.
Wow. Interesting. One thought I have, one thing I wanted to ask you, besides the fact that you are busy with wind synthesis for quite some years now, you're also an educator. You're a teacher, a music teacher, a saxophone teacher. And one of the things that I do since, 8 years, I teach an EWI class at the Conservatory of Amsterdam.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I always wondered about is, historically speaking, while keyboards and synthesizers developed and became and stayed popular, there was always a resentment from the EWI wind synthesis in the professional music community. Let's put it first, like that. So, in other words, keyboards became very popular. People were buying them from all levels, so professional, amateurs, and basically stayed like that, while the EWI and maybe the Lyricon back in the day, EWI and other instruments that came along, kind of stayed always kind of on the back door. I wonder, what do you think about that? Why is it? What are the challenges or reasons that it went like this?
I think there's a couple of reasons I can think of. One is that getting to hear really good players on the WindSynth hasn't been that easy. Of course, so many people have been hearing guys like Judd Miller. I mean, I would imagine pretty much, the vast population of most countries, they've heard some Judd Miller. They just didn't realize it because he's been on so many film tracks and things that it's almost difficult not to have heard some of his playing. But they didn't know it was an EWI playing, So I think it's not easy to hear people playing, certainly live. I'm trying to think in the UK. I'm struggling to think. I really don't think I've seen many people at all playing live on the...
I heard a story about Courtney Pine, but...
Courtney Pine played some...
That's it.
Yeah, there's a few guys that have played it, again, within certain kind of band setups and things. Not very many that I can think of that have played it as an actual solo frontline instrument. So I think that's partly it. And also from a performing point of view, I wonder if there's this somehow a disconnect that some people struggle with, especially, if I go and do a gig and I'm playing a violin or something from the wind synthesizer. People really struggle with that, don't they? Because it can't be a violin. Of course, it's not a violin. It doesn't look like a violin. You should be doing this, not this. And so that's wrong. You know, and I think this kind of curtain can come down because there's this mismatch of what our ears are hearing and what our eyes are seeing.
So in other words, maybe the fact that the iwi is not defined as what it should do,
I think so. Yeah.
creates this type of confusion
Yeah.
among
I think so.
listeners and players.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. But I'm sure, like you, you know, if I do a gig, and I can do gigs where I'm playing, you know, 98% saxophone, and I'll do a tiny bit of iwi, maybe. What do people come up and ask me about afterwards? The WindSynth. It's always the WindSynth. You know, it's like, okay, well, ask me about my saxophone playing. But no, they want to know about the WindSynth. So I think there's definitely some interest there. But
yeah, this is something that I wonder a lot about, especially these days, you know, because we are facing this massive change up that actually has been boiling up since a couple of years in terms of sound technology and possibilities, and you know, and the whole revolution of VSTs, audio units, virtual instruments, the fact that you can play so many instruments, you can emulate so many instruments, you know. Right now, and this is my personal thought, maybe because of COVID-19, maybe a much bigger realization will come out of it that maybe this is now the time to get into this, because obviously playing in orchestras, playing in big bands, is going to be very tough, very difficult. Let alone just to get into one room and rehearse. Forget about that for now. But also the fact that you have to bring it to somewhere and also fund it.
Yes.
So I think we're in a sort of a point where right now this is going to be, fortunately, to the iwi and the wind synthesis players, Aerophone players, but maybe unfortunate to the music world in some ways. I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but I'm saying maybe now is the time to get into this, because in 5 or 10 years, who knows what's going to happen?
Sure.
There's so much potential here, but still there's this sort of resentment that I wonder how can we create more interest for players to play it. What is it about? Was it about the technical aspects of playing the instrument? Maybe it's the fact that it's, as we said, you know, it's undefined. Maybe there's something else. This is something that keeps me occupied, and I wonder a lot all the time.
Yeah, and again, you know, the availability, the amount of settings that we have now, that we can maneuver, the plugins, the external hardware gear. This is all fantastic, but for a saxophone player who's brand new to all of this, this is bewildering, isn't it? You know, and many people, it's a bit like, you know, when we started off, perhaps if you got into computing early on, you know, things aren't too scary now, but sometimes with things, you know, like say we look at a program like Logic now, it's an absolute monster of a program, and this is going to take someone a long time to get into and get the full benefit from it.
Right.
And I think that is an issue with WindSynths, that for the more professional players, we want all these extra bells and whistles because we want to control this and that and send different CCs left, right, and center. But for the new player, that's a bit bewildering and maybe sort of off-putting, you know, because some people, they don't even quite understand perhaps, well, this is MIDI. Well, okay, does that send sound? Well, no, it doesn't send sound. It sends information to make sound. Oh, so that's sound then? No, that's not sound. Well, can it do on Bluetooth? And, you know, all of these questions start to come up, and you realize that, you know, many people are a little bit confused by all of that stuff. And it's a shame because we're particularly now, in the last 5 years, the market for wind synthesizers has really taken off. The Silphio, Bergland instruments.
Right.
There are many others, Ecorder, of course, the Aerophone stuff. The Yamaha just brought out their new one. And again, the great thing is there are choices now for us to say, okay, what do I want to do with a wind synthesizer? This one would suit me. But still, all of them perhaps might appear a little bit scary to somebody that has only ever played a saxophone or a clarinet or a flute, and how will we deal with this? And I think that's a bit of a barrier. And maybe that's why those iwi videos that I did were very successful, because I tried to make it that this is as if people knew nothing at all, and let me hold your hand and walk you through some of the real basic things, which I don't think there's that much of available.
Yeah, that's true. That's actually that's correct. That's correct. Yeah. Yeah, I think that reading an iwi manual can be very confusing and very time consuming.
Yeah.
To figure out, just to get like a right expression that you
absolutely
you have. Do you show the Aerophone, the iwi to your students?
Yes.
And how do they react to it?
The percentage of, shall we say, people that would take the bite is very high. In fact, I'm careful, really, particularly with the younger players, because I know that their parents won't be that pleased with me if I show them this instrument. The kids are going to go home and say, "Mom, I want one of these." And of course, they perhaps don't fully appreciate what's involved with it. But yeah, they are very keen. And, some of the students that come out and see some of the gigs or see my stuff on YouTube, they're very impressed, and they like it. And a lot of them have gone forward and bought instruments, which is nice. And then I've done some tuition with them.
Great.
As you know, it's the instrument is a tool to produce the overall effect, and in front of the instrument is the musician. And I think, unfortunately, and I feel sometimes it's almost deceptive to somebody, because there's this feeling, I think, sometimes, oh, if I buy one of those, I'll sound like that. And of course, that's probably not going to happen. As you know, it takes many years to work on these things, and we are still working, and we all will be working for the rest of our lives to do the best we can. And it takes time and patience and many hours of head scratching, working things out. And that is where the work is. It's what you do yourself to put into the instrument and understand it. That's where we're at.
So the conclusion that I draw from our conversation are maybe two things I draw from our talk. Is one, that the iwi, the wind synthesizers in general, they're undefined instruments. So nobody actually, as you said, we want to buy this instrument because we want to sound like this. Could be that while through history, keyboards were more defined in terms of sound, according to the musical styles that developed. People knew or had an idea about this instrument equals this sound. Sure. While the wind synthesizer basically was never defined, so nobody knew how to even spot it, to understand it. This is a wind synthesizer. This is an iwi. This is not a keyboard.
Yes.
Right. So this non-definition of an instrument.
Yeah.
And the second thing is that maybe because in some ways it was ahead of its time, giving all these new possibilities that in some way were more far away from pressing a keyboard.
Yes.
Because there's so many things involved, new technique, the mouthpiece is totally different, the
Yes.
embouchure, for that's even
Yes.
a total different thing.
Yeah.
Made this this maybe regression or criticism towards this instrument, which resulted in a this is too weird, I cannot handle this.
Sure.
Interesting.
Yeah.
This is
It's to me, and I'm sure also to you, we know, don't we, when we can hear that synthesizer sound, but we know within a few seconds that's not being played on a keyboard. That's being played on a WindSynth because it has that expressive quality that I don't want to go against the keyboard players, but I think the options, the expressive control that the Wind synthesizer has is on a different level to quite a lot of what the keyboard players can do. When you can take a line and you can shape just one note with crescendo, diminuendo, vibrato, no vibrato, bending up, bending down very subtly, all of those subtleties are there, I think, in much more detail than we get mostly in keyboard stuff. That's my feeling.
Interesting. What are you working on these days?
Okay, so we just did the Aerophone thing, kept me occupied, quite a bit through the summer. I have a teaching practice here in Nottingham, so thank goodness most of that has kept going, because this is the sort of bread and butter to my earnings, and like many of us, we had to get going on Zoom pretty quickly and pick up the ropes there. And so obviously that's got to continue. We wait for the time that we can get back to doing some performing, but this looks at least a few months away still. I guess normally, if the situation had been, as normal, I would have been possibly traveling around a bit more, doing some Roland demonstrations, but that's on hold for now.
For sure.
And so again, we end up doing video stuff. So I'm planning more videos for my channel on the Aerophone, trying to, a bit like I did with the Akai Iwi, trying to do some step-by-step stuff on helping people with that. It's been a while since I've done any proper serious recording. I've sort of got a little bit of an itch to do a little bit more of that as well. So those are the main things at the moment. But like a lot of us, the priority is getting through this time and hoping all our family and friends are safe and well. And touch wood, if we can come out the other side, then there's lots of good things to look forward to.
Amen.
But can I just say, I'm really loving what you're doing with this series of talks.
Thank you.
And to be able to hear some of those fantastic players. I've watched all of your interviews, but to see Bob Mincer and Steve and Judd, just incredible to actually see those guys talk and discuss some of their history and their involvement. And I just feel it's such a fantastic library of a snapshot of wind synthesis at this point in time. I just love that you're doing it. And thank you so much for inviting me to make a very small contribution to that.
Likewise. This is basically a result of an idea that I had for a long time, because I felt that coming again to that question of explaining and talking about wind synthesis, there wasn't actually a lot of explaining and talking about wind synthesis in general throughout, history. A lot of technical things were published and mentioned, but sometimes you have to hear a good story from someone to draw yourself into that. That will make you curious about. Maybe this is interesting to go into, and I felt that this was never actually expressed.
Yes.
And nevertheless expressed in video, to see the player and hear him talk about it.
Absolutely. Yes.
That's that that human expression, that human experience that helps you to, or maybe draws you or inspires you to get into it. So since COVID hit, I had the time to fulfill the project. So that's what I'm doing.
Well,
and
I'm sure
every person, to me, that I invite in the series, he represents a certain topic.
Yes.
In this, which I really want to know about. And I think that one of the reasons that I asked you and speak to you is because whatever concerns education, according to my perspective, you were that person that I was seeking to look and to talk to. I think that wind synthesis education in general is something that, I'm very much involved into it, but there's not a lot of players or musicians that I know which are doing this.
Absolutely.
And I think, again, this is it's a pearl, it's a gem that, according to my vision, will grow very fast these coming years. And now it's the time it's going to happen.
Sure.
So, I'm just looking for different opinions and ideas about it.
Well, it's great.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you so much. It's,
my pleasure.
What a fun talk. I enjoyed
I
it
hope
very
we'll
much.
meet up again soon when all of this clears up.
Yes. All right.